Chapter 3. The Girl in the Web. The farmhouse was empty when Gwyn reached home. Mr. Griffiths could be heard drilling in his workshop. Mrs. Griffiths had popped out to see a neighbour, leaving a note for her son on the kitchen table. Soup on the stove. Stoke it up if it's cold. The soup or the stove, Gwyn muttered to himself. He opened the stove door, but the red embers looked so warm and comforting he was reluctant to cover them up with fresh coal. He turned off the lights and knelt beside the fire, holding out his hands to the warmth. He must have put the matchbox down somewhere. He must have left it open, because he suddenly became aware that Arianwen was climbing up the back of the armchair. When she reached the top, she swung down the arm, leaving a trail of silver thread behind her. Up she went to the top again and then down, her silk glistening in the firelight. Now the spider was swinging and spinning back and forth across the chair, so fast that Gwyn could only see a spark shooting over an ever-widening sheet of silver. A cobweb, he breathed. And yet it was not a cobweb. There was someone there. Someone was sitting where the cobweb should have been. A girl with long pale hair and smiling eyes. Bethan, sitting just as she used to sit with her legs tucked under her, one hand resting on the arm of the chair and the other supporting her chin as she gazed into the fire. And still Arianwen spun, tracing the girl's face, her fingers and her hair, until every feature became so clear Gwyn felt he could have touched the girl. The tiny spider entwined the silk on one last corner and then ceased her feverish activity. She waited just above the girl's head, allowing Gwyn to contemplate her creation without interruption. Was the girl an illusion? An image on a silver screen? No, she was more than that. Gwyn could see her impression, her elbow made on the arm of the chair, the fibres of her skirt, the lines of the slim, pale hand. Only Bethan had ever sat thus. Only Bethan had gazed into the fire in such a way. But his sister was dark. Her cheeks were rosy, her skin tanned golden by the wind. This girl was fragile, so silver pale she might have been made of gossamer. Bethan, Gwyn whispered, as he stretched out his hand towards the girl. A ripple spread across the shining image as water moves when a stone pierces the surface. But Gwyn did not notice a cool draught entering the kitchen as the door began to open. Bethan, he said again. The figure shivering violently as the door swung wider. And then the light was on. The girl in the cobweb hovered momentarily and gradually became the fragments and to fade until Gwyn was left staring into an empty chair, his hand dropped to his side. Gwyn, what are you doing, love? What are you staring at? His mother came round the chair and looked down at him, frowning anxiously. Gwyn found that speech was not within his power, as part of his strength seemed to have evaporated with the girl. Who are you talking to? And why are you sitting in the dark? Concern caused Mrs. Griffith to speak sharply. Her son swallowed but failed to utter a sound. He stared up at her helplessly. Stop it, Gwyn. Stop looking at me like that. Get up. Say something. His mother shook his shoulder and pulled him to his feet. He stumbled over the table and sat down, trying desperately to drag himself away from the image in the cobweb. The girl had smiled at him before she had vanished, and he knew that she was real. Mrs. Griffith ignored him now, busying herself about the stove, shoveling in coal, warming up the soup. By the time the meal was ready and sat steaming in the bowl before him, he had recovered himself enough to say, "Thanks, ma'am." Perhaps you could tell me what you were doing then. His mother persisted, calmer now that she had done something practical. It was just cold, ma'am. It was nice by the stove with the door. When the door is open, I sort of dozed. I couldn't wake up. Gwyn tried to explain away something his mother would never believe nor understand. Well, you're a funny one. I would have been here, but I wanted to pickle some of those tomatoes, and I had run down to Betty Lloyd for some sugar. Mrs. Griffith chattered on somewhat nervously, Gwyn thought, while he sat passively trying to make appropriate remarks in the few gaps that her commentary allowed. His father returned from the workshop, brought Gwyn to life. "Don't sit down, Da," he cried, leaping towards the armchair. "What on earth? What's going on with you, boy?" Mr. Griffith was taken by surprise. "It's a matchbox," Gwyn explained in the chair. "I don't want it squashed." "Well, what's so special about a matchbox?" "Well, there's something in it of a particular sort of insect," stammered Gwyn. "For school," he added. "It's important, you see."